It began with a sealed discussion inside the private drawing room at Windsor Castle, one so tightly controlled that even senior aides were denied entry. But when young James, Earl of Wessex, emerged from that meeting beside his father, the expression on his face stunned palace watchers. Something unexpected had happened. Something tied not only to Prince Philip's final wishes, but to the future of Edinburgh itself. And according to whispers now spreading through royal circles, trustees had just confirmed a truth the palace spent years refusing to address. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For years, James had existed quietly on the edges of royal life, shielded from the chaos that swallowed so many others inside the House of Windsor. While public attention fixated on bitter family feuds, memoirs, accusations, and endless palace crises, Prince Edward and Sophie carefully raised their son away from the noise. That silence, many believed, was intentional. Palace insiders now whisper that Prince Philip himself preferred it that way. Reports suggest the late Duke of Edinburgh saw something unusual. Al and his grandson long before the public ever paid attention to him, a restraint that reminded him of an older generation of royals, one built not on celebrity, but on duty. And according to several interpretations emerging from royal circles, that belief may have shaped confidential conversations held during Philip's final years. The meeting at Windsor reportedly lasted far longer than expected. Legal advisors connected to long-standing royal trusts were allegedly summoned behind closed doors, alongside senior representatives tied to Prince Philip's estate arrangements. Even within palace administrative circles, details were kept unusually restricted. One former royal correspondent described the atmosphere afterward as cold, tense, and deeply emotional. That alone was enough to ignite speculation. Because inside the monarchy, secrecy rarely surrounds something insignificant. And this time, the whispers all pointed toward one subject: the future of the Edinburgh legacy and whether Prince Philip had privately protected specific succession expectations tied to Edward's family line. What made the situation even more explosive was the suggestion that James himself had not fully understood the weight of what was being discussed. Witnesses claimed he appeared visibly shaken as he departed Windsor alongside his parents, avoiding conversation and remaining unusually withdrawn during the journey back. For royal watchers accustomed to seeing the young Earl remain composed and distant from palace drama, the reaction immediately raised questions. What exactly had trustees confirmed inside that room, and why did it seem to carry such emotional significance for Prince Edward himself? Some insiders believe the answer lies in Prince Philip's deeply personal attachment to the Duke of Edinburgh title, a title he reportedly viewed not simply as an honor, but as a lifelong mission connected to service, endurance, and sacrifice. Reports suggest documents revisited during the meeting referenced earlier, understanding surrounding the continuation of that identity through Edward's branch of the family. While no official confirmation has emerged, royal commentators have begun openly discussing whether Philip quietly envisioned James inheriting not just symbolic ties to Edinburgh, but a larger responsibility connected to preserving his legacy. That possibility has already triggered discomfort within certain palace circles, because the modern monarchy has spent years attempting to streamline titles, simplify roles, and reduce future complications. Yet Philip belonged to a different royal era entirely, one where legacy carried emotional weight beyond institutional strategy. And according to those familiar with his thinking, he feared that some traditions could disappear entirely if left vulnerable to politics, optics, or internal power balancing. The deeper this story spreads, the more uncomfortable questions begin surfacing around why these discussions may have remained hidden for so long. Some palace insiders reportedly feared that public acknowledgement of Philip's private wishes could create future tensions surrounding royal hierarchy and expectations. Others claim King Charles himself may have delayed certain conversations to avoid reopening old debates during a period already overshadowed by illness, instability, and succession pressures. But regardless of the reasons, the emotional impact of the trustee confirmation appears impossible to ignore now. Because for the first time, attention is shifting directly toward James not as a background royal, but as someone unexpectedly connected to one of Prince Philip's final unresolved hopes for the monarchy. And perhaps that is what has unsettled royal observers the most. James never chased attention. He never built public drama around himself. Unlike other younger royals drawn into endless headlines, he remained almost invisible by comparison. Yet now, according to whispers echoing through Windsor corridors, that very quietness may be the reason Prince Philip trusted him more than anyone realized. A future once considered distant suddenly feels dangerously close. And behind palace walls, where legacy matters more than emotion and silence often hides the deepest truths, one realization now appears unavoidable. But the shocking revelation wasn't simply about a title. It pointed toward a hidden royal understanding Prince Philip may have protected until the very end. Long before palace politics turned titles into bargaining chips, Prince Philip reportedly viewed Edinburgh as more than a ceremonial honor. To him, it was legacy, duty, continuity. And according to accounts now resurfacing from former royal staffers, he may have believed only one young royal truly reflected the spirit of that inherit. Ants. Not through ambition, but through silence, discipline, and restraint. The Duke of Edinburgh title had always carried a deeply personal meaning for Prince Philip. Unlike other royal honors passed around through tradition and ceremony, Edinburgh represented the life he'd built beside Queen Elizabeth II during the monarchy's most turbulent decades. It symbolized sacrifice without complaint, service without applause. For more than 70 years, Philip reportedly treated the title not as decoration, but as a responsibility tied to the survival of royal discipline itself. And insiders now claim that during the final years of his life, as public scandals consumed the younger generation of royals, Philip became increasingly concerned about what would happen to that legacy after he was gone. Reports suggest he quietly questioned whether the monarchy was drifting too far toward celebrity, emotional spectacle, and public dependency. In private conversations, according to those familiar with palace circles, he allegedly returned again and again to one subject: the need for steadiness inside the family line. That is where James unexpectedly entered the conversation. While other younger royals dominated headlines through controversy, interviews, or public drama, James remained almost entirely absent from palace chaos. Prince Edward and Sophie reportedly made enormous efforts to protect their son from the relentless machinery of royal exposure. Former aides now whisper that Philip admired that decision immensely. Unlike senior royals raised beneath constant media pressure, James grew up in relative quiet, away from the emotional warfare that slowly fractured parts of the family. And according to resurfacing accounts from individuals connected to Windsor staff circles, Philip saw echoes of himself in that silence: reserved, careful, observant, never desperate for attention. Those similarities, once dismissed as coincidence, are now being re-examined in a completely different light. Royal commentators have increasingly speculated that Philip may have privately viewed James as the natural future guardian of what Edinburgh represented. Not necessarily in an immediate constitutional sense, but symbolically, emotionally, historically. That distinction matters deeply inside royal culture, where unofficial understandings often carry as much weight as formal declarations. Reports suggest Philip discussed these concerns with a trusted group of advisors during periods of declining health, particularly as questions surrounding succession, modernization, and royal identity intensified during the later years of Queen Elizabeth's reign. Some insiders even claim Philip worried that the meaning of Edinburgh itself could eventually become diluted if treated merely as another transferable title within palace restructuring plans. At the center of these whispers sits an increasingly uncomfortable question: did Philip expect the rights and identity connected to Edinburgh to eventually flow toward James directly? Officially, the line of succession surrounding royal dukedoms follows strict constitutional processes. But palace history has never been shaped solely by official rules. Informal agreements, private wishes, and family expectations often operate quietly beneath the surface. And according to several interpretations now emerging from royal observers, Philip may have believed James would one day carry forward the deeper values attached to the Edinburgh name in ways others could not. That possibility has reportedly unsettled certain figures within royal circles. Paragraph 3. Particularly those focused on simplifying the monarchy for the future. Palace insiders have hinted that disagreements quietly unfolded behind closed doors long before these trustee revelations surfaced publicly. Some reportedly feared that elevating James symbolically could create future complications surrounding hierarchy and public perception. Others allegedly believed acknowledging Philip's preferences too openly might lead to a loss of control or a loss of influence. Exposé tensions within the royal family during a period already strained by illness, scandal, and transition. But despite those concerns, the whispers never fully disappeared. In fact, according to royal staffers now speaking cautiously through media intermediaries, the silence surrounding James only made speculation stronger. Because inside the monarchy, what remains unspoken often carries the greatest importance of all. And now, as more details slowly emerge from the shadows of Windsor, a growing number of observers believe the monarchy may be confronting something far bigger than a routine title discussion. This is becoming a story about inheritance in its purest form, not wealth, not privilege, but identity itself. A question of who carries forward the values Prin. C.E. Philip spent a lifetime defending. And for some members of the royal family, that realization may be far more dangerous than anyone expected. And as whispers about Philip's intentions intensified, attention suddenly shifted toward documents many believed would never see daylight. At the center of the storm now sits a collection of trustee papers reportedly linked to Prince Philip's final estate. Consultations documents described by insiders as sensitive, deeply personal, and potentially explosive for the monarchy's future balance. What stunned royal observers wasn't merely their existence. It was the language allegedly buried inside them. For decades, the House of Windsor survived by protecting its secrets behind layers of protocol, silence, and carefully controlled appearances. But according to whispers now circulating through royal circles, these newly discussed papers may contain something far more dangerous than financial instructions or ceremonial guidance. Reports suggest they reveal fragments of Prince Philip's private thinking during the final chapter of his life, a period when the monarchy itself appeared increasingly fragile. Insiders claim trustees revisiting the company. Response was struck by repeated references to continuity preservation and the safeguarding of what Philip allegedly described as the spirit of Edinburgh. That wording alone has sent shockwaves through palace observers, because it implies this was never simply about inheritance. It was about legacy control. The documents, according to several royal commentators, are believed to connect directly to confidential estate planning conversations held after Philip stepped back from public duties. During those later years, sources suggest he became deeply concerned about the future identity of the monarchy as internal divisions intensified. Public scandals were dominating headlines. Family relationships were collapsing in full view of the world. Trust inside royal circles was reportedly deteriorating. And amid that instability, Philip allegedly turned his attention toward the one branch of the family that remained almost untouched by chaos: Edward, Sophie, and their children. That realization now sits at the center of growing speculation surrounding James and the future of Edinburgh itself. Claims emerging from palace-adjacent media figures suggest the trustee papers referenced maintaining Edinburgh continuity specifically through Edward's line. Though the exact wording remains hidden from public view, insiders whisper that legal advisors immediately recognize the deeper symbolic implications buried within those phrases. Because in royal culture, continuity carries enormous meaning. It suggests preservation not just of titles, but of values, identity, and institutional purpose. And according to several interpretations now surfacing through royal analysts, Philip may have feared the Edinburgh name eventually becoming diluted through political compromises or future restructuring efforts designed to modernize the monarchy. That possibility reportedly triggered immediate concern within certain palace departments. Legal teams were allegedly asked to quietly review hereditary implications connected to the Duke of Edinburgh title and its long-term symbolic future. While no constitutional crisis exists publicly, insiders claim conversations behind closed doors became increasingly delicate once references to James began surfacing more openly. Media commentators have even suggested the wording inside the trustee correspondence acknowledged James in ways never previously discussed outside trusted royal circles. Not as a future celebrity royal, not as a public figure seeking attention, but as a potential custodian of Philip's old-world philosophy: discipline before recognition, duty before visibility. Questions are now growing louder around whether King Charles privately understood the depth of Philip's preferences years before these rumors exploded into public discussion. Some insiders believe he did. Others insist the situation was deliberately left unresolved to avoid reopening difficult family debates during a period already consumed by illness, succession pressure, and institutional uncertainty. Whatever the truth may be, palace communications have reportedly become extraordinarily cautious since whispers surrounding the trustee papers intensified. Briefings have grown shorter, public references more restrained. Even royal commentators known for strong palace connections appear unusually careful in how they discuss the matter. That alone has fueled suspicion that something far more significant may be unfolding beneath the surface. Royal experts are now openly debating whether symbolic title rights can quietly evolve into informal family authority over time. It sounds impossible to outsiders. But inside royal history, symbolism has always mattered almost as much as law. A title can shape influence. A legacy can shape perception. And perception, within monarchy, often becomes reality long before official declarations are ever made. That is why the emergence of these trustee papers has shaken royal observers so deeply. Because for the first time, the public is beginning to sense that Prince Philip may have left behind more than memories or ceremonial honors. He may have left behind a hidden blueprint for who he believed should protect the soul of Edinburgh after him. And while palace officials worked desperately to contain the rumors, another development was already unfolding beyond the walls of Windsor, one far more emotional, far more personal, and impossible for royal watchers to ignore, because sometimes the strongest confirmation does not come from official statements or sealed documents. Sometimes it appears in a single human reaction that reveals more than words ever could. But while the palace tried to contain the growing speculation, one deeply emotional moment changed everything for those watching closely. Witnesses described the moment as brief but unforgettable. As James exited Windsor beside Sophie and Edward, his composure reportedly faltered for just a second. Not with celebration, not with triumph, but with the visible weight of something far greater, a realization that Prince Philip's shadow may now rest directly upon him. Those who observed the family that afternoon claimed the atmosphere felt unusually heavy, even by royal standards. There were no smiles of relief, no triumphant gestures. Instead, according to palace insiders, the mood surrounding Edward and Sophie carried the quiet intensity of people confronting something deeply personal and impossible to reverse. James, who had spent nearly his entire life shielded from the brutal machinery of royal expectation, suddenly appeared caught in the center of a conversation far larger than himself. Reports suggest the trustee confirmation discussions inside Windsor had gone far beyond routine estate matters. Some insiders even whispered that the emotional reaction afterwards stunned senior aides who rarely witnessed visible vulnerability from Edward's side of the family. For years, James had remained one of the monarchy's least public. Clive exposed young royals. Unlike other members of his generation whose lives unfolded beneath relentless headlines, he existed almost in the background of national attention. That distance was not accidental. Sophie and Edward reportedly worked tirelessly to preserve a sense of normalcy for their children, protecting them from palace politics, media obsession, and institutional pressure. But according to royal observers, that protective wall may have cracked the moment those trustee discussions confirmed how closely Prince Philip's private legacy had become connected to James's future. Witnesses claim Sophie's behavior changed noticeably after leaving Windsor grounds. Usually composed and carefully measured in public settings, she reportedly remained unusually close to her son throughout the journey home, shielding him from approaching questions and quietly steering conversations away whenever the subject of Edinburgh surfaced. Palace aides allegedly tightened media access surrounding the family almost immediately afterward, fueling even greater speculation among royal commentators. Because inside royal culture, sudden silence often signals internal sensitivity. And the deeper the palace tried to suppress the growing rumors, the more attention the situation attracted. Observers familiar with James's personality have increasingly pointed towards similarities between him and Prince Philip himself. Reserved, careful with emotion, uncomfortable with spectacle. Former staffers who worked around Philip during his later years reportedly noted that he respected individuals who spoke little but carried themselves with discipline. That same quiet restraint now defines many public perceptions surrounding James. Some insiders believe Philip recognized those qualities early and privately saw them as increasingly rare within the modern monarchy. While other royals became symbols of public conflict, interviews, and institutional tension, James represented something older and almost forgotten royal instinct to remain silent rather than perform. According to palace insiders, Prince Edward himself became unexpectedly emotional while discussing his father's legacy during private conversations connected to the trustee meeting. That detail alone has shaken royal watchers. Edward has long been viewed as one of the monarchy's most disciplined and restrained figures, rarely allowing emotion to surface publicly. Yet reports suggest that during discussions surrounding Philip's wishes and the future of Edinburgh continuity, the emotional weight became impossible to ignore. Some believe Edward understood better than anyone what those documents truly represented, not merely ceremonial concerns, but the final hopes of a father who spent decades defending the institution from collapse, scandal, and instability. What makes the situation even more dramatic is the growing belief that James never anticipated becoming central to succession conversations at all. By all accounts, he was raised outside the expectation of major royal prominence. His life followed a quieter path, far removed from the constitutional pressures surrounding William or the controversies consuming Harry. And yet, almost overnight, speculation has transformed him into a symbol of continuity tied directly to Prince Philip's private worldview. Public fascination has intensified precisely because of that contrast. The young royal who avoided attention now finds himself standing beneath one of the largest shadows in modern royal history. And while sympathy around James continued growing, another reality as slowly emerging behind palace walls, one far less emotional and far more dangerous. Because the moment legacy becomes tied to symbolism inside the monarchy, power inevitably follows close behind. Questions about Edinburgh were no longer simply personal. They were becoming political, institutional, potentially divisive. And somewhere inside that growing tension, a new struggle had already begun to take shape. Yet behind the emotional reactions and palace silence, another battle was quietly unfolding, one involving power, symbolism, and the monarchy's future image. What appeared at first to be a simple family matter soon evolved into something far more delicate. Because within royal circles, titles are never just titles. They are influence, legacy, positioning. And according to various interpretations now emerging from palace insiders, the Edinburgh question may have reopened old tensions buried since Queen Elizabeth II's final years. Behind the walls of Windsor, conversations surrounding royal titles are rarely emotional on the surface. They are strategic, calculated, quietly tied to the future architecture of the monarchy itself. That is why the growing speculation surrounding Ease and the Edinburgh legacy has unsettled so many within palace circles. Reports suggest sharply differing opinions existed for years regarding what should ultimately happen to the Duke of Edinburgh identity after Prince Philip's death. Some insiders allegedly believe the title should gradually evolve into a more symbolic modern role aligned with King Charles's vision of a streamlined monarchy. Others reportedly argued that Edinburgh carried too much personal history to be reduced into another institutional adjustment. To them, it represented one of the last living connections to Philip's old-school philosophy of duty, endurance, and silent service. That divide may now be growing impossible to ignore. According to palace commentators, concerns were quietly raised long ago about how to preserve Philip's legacy authentically, without creating future complications around hierarchy and succession optics. The problem, insiders claim, was never simply legal. It was emotional. Because Prince Philip's identity became inseparable from Edinburgh over the course of decades. The title symbolized the role he built for himself beside Queen Elizabeth II during years of extraordinary public pressure. Regarding And according to reports now resurfacing from former staffers and royal historians, Philip allegedly feared that future royal modernization could slowly erase the values he spent a lifetime protecting. That fear now sits at the center of a growing internal debate. Palace traditionalists are reportedly pushing for continuity through Edward and James, arguing that preserving the Edinburgh identity within Philip's direct family line would maintain historical authenticity. Some insiders even claim those traditionalists view James as uniquely positioned to embody the kind of restrained royal conduct that has become increasingly rare in the modern era. Quiet, disciplined, uninterested in celebrity. In many ways, exactly the opposite of the emotionally public royal culture that has dominated headlines in recent years. But others inside royal circles allegedly view the situation differently. Questions continue emerging around how King Charles's long-term plans for streamlining the monarchy could affect hereditary symbolism moving forward. A smaller monarchy, by definition, leaves less room for expanded ceremonial influence. And that reality creates enormous uncertainty surrounding you. Jeer royals who were never expected to occupy central institutional positions. According to several commentators, the concern is not merely about titles themselves, it is about what those titles represent emotionally to the British public. Because symbolism inside the monarchy often carries extraordinary power, even when formal authority remains limited. Royal experts have increasingly debated whether James could eventually become the face of a modernized Edinburgh role built around quiet duty, rather than public prominence. That phrase has appeared repeatedly in commentary surrounding the trustee discussions, and it reflects something much deeper than branding or image management. It reflects a growing hunger among some royal observers for stability after years of turmoil. Comparisons are now being drawn between Prince William's future monarchy and the disciplined structure Philip once defended relentlessly beside Queen Elizabeth II. Some insiders reportedly believe William himself respects those traditional values more deeply than the public realizes, even as he prepares to lead a far more modern institution. Yet the emotional burden surrounding these expectations continues to intensify. Ifying for James himself. Public sympathy has grown rapidly as royal watchers recognize the impossible position forming around him. He did not seek this attention. He did not campaign for influence. And yet, according to whispers spreading through palace corridors, he may now represent something larger than any individual royal role. A symbol of continuity during a period of profound uncertainty. That realization has only deepened the pressure surrounding every appearance, every rumor, and every carefully managed palace response connected to the Edinburgh discussions. And perhaps that is what makes this entire story feel so fragile behind closed doors. Because the monarchy now appears trapped between two competing instincts: modernization on one side, historical preservation on the other. One focused on survival through change, the other focused on survival through continuity. Somewhere in the middle stands a young royal who never expected to become part of either battle. And as the monarchy struggles to balance modernization with legacy, one final realization now hangs heavily over Windsor itself. In the end, this story may never have been about crowns, privilege, or status at all. According to those closest to the late Duke of Edinburgh's worldview, it was always about preservation, the survival of values he believed were slowly disappearing from modern royal life. And now, astonishingly, that burden may rest upon the shoulders of the one royal least prepared for the spotlight. For most of his life, Prince Philip stood as one of the monarchy's most uncompromising figures. He believed in endurance over emotion, discipline over performance, and duty over personal comfort. Even his critics acknowledged the relentless consistency with which he approached royal service. Through wars, scandals, constitutional crises, and decades of cultural change, Philip reportedly viewed the monarchy not as a platform for individual expression, but as an institution that could survive only through restraint and sacrifice. That philosophy shaped nearly every part of his public and private life. And according to palace insiders now revisiting the final years before his death, Philip grew increasingly worried that those values were beginning to disappear beneath the pressures of modern celebrity culture, public image battles, and internal division. That fear may explain why so much attention has now shifted toward James. Reports suggest Philip did not see ambition in his grandson. He saw continuity, a quiet steadiness rarely found inside royal life anymore. While others fought public wars through interviews, documentaries, and carefully crafted narratives, James remained almost invisible by comparison. He avoided spectacle. He avoided controversy. And according to those familiar with Philip's thinking, those qualities mattered far more than charisma or popularity ever could. Palace insiders whisper that the Duke of Edinburgh intentionally kept certain wishes private precisely because he feared public acknowledgement would ignite conflict inside an already fractured institution. Silence, in Philip's world, was often protection. That is what makes the emotional significance surrounding Edinburgh so powerful now. To outsiders, a title may appear ceremonial. But within the House of Windsor, certain titles carry emotional histories that stretch far beyond constitutional paperwork. Edinburgh was not simply attached to Philip's name. It became inseparable from his identity. And the growing possibility that he hoped to preserve that connection through Edward's family line has transformed the entire conversation into something deeply personal for those closest to him. Reports suggest Edward understood those feelings more clearly than anyone else, which may explain the emotion insiders claim surfaced during the trustee discussions. For him, this was never about elevating James into prominence. It was about protecting the final traces of his father's worldview before they disappeared entirely. Public perception has now begun shifting dramatically as more royal observers focus on James himself. The young royal, once regarded as distant from succession relevance, is increasingly viewed as a potential stabilizing figure for a monarchy struggling to redefine itself. Ironically, it may be his reluctance toward attention that makes him compelling to so many people. In an era dominated by public conflict and emotional exposure, his restraint feels almost unfamiliar. Some royal commentators believe that alone reflects the influence Prince Philip quietly left behind. Others argue it represents a desperate longing within the public for a return to quieter forms of royal service built on consistency rather than performance. Yet despite the growing speculation, enormous uncertainty still surrounds the trustee papers and what they may ultimately reveal. Questions remain over whether additional correspondence connected to Philip's final wishes could eventually surface. Palace officials continue maintaining careful silence, neither confirming nor denying the increasingly emotional interpretations spreading through royal circles. But perhaps that silence is meaningful in itself, because the deeper this story unfolds, the more it feels less like a legal discussion and more like the conclusion of a private battle Prince Philip spent years fighting quietly behind palace walls, a battle over what kind of monarchy would survive after him. And according to whispers now echoing through Windsor itself, there are many who believe that battle may already be over. Not publicly, not ceremoniously, but privately, emotionally, and symbolically. The growing belief that Philip's final legacy struggle quietly succeeded has changed the way royal observers view everything surrounding James and Edinburgh. The monarchy now faces a future shaped not only by official succession plans or constitutional reforms, but by silent promises carried forward through memory, loyalty, and deeply personal understandings hidden for years behind royal discretion. Because behind the palace walls, where titles rise and reputations collapse, Prince Philip's final lesson may have already been passed on in silence, in duty, and in the stunned expression of a young royal suddenly realizing the weight of history now belongs to him. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.